Hey everyone! So, if you've been keeping tabs on the gaming hardware space lately, you absolutely know that Valve just dropped a massive announcement for 2026. Today, we're doing a complete under-the-hood teardown of their brand new hardware, the Steam Machine. We're going to peel back all the marketing spin and look directly at the silicon to see exactly how this PC console hybrid fundamentally differs from the portable hardware that paved the way for it. We're getting pretty technical in this explainer today, so buckle up.
All right, let's dive right into this. 6 times 6x. When Valve unveiled the Steam Machine, this was the mathematical claim that literally dominated every headline. They are stating for a fact that this new living room box is over 6 times more powerful than the beloved Steam Deck. And you know, for a lot of us who use the Steam Deck every single day, that feels like an incredibly bold claim. How exactly do you take an architecture that we already consider highly optimized and just multiply its raw throughput by 6?
Well, to figure out how they pulled this off, we're going to break this explainer down into 4 core technological pillars: Zen 4 processing power, the RDNA 3 graphics core, the shift to a dedicated memory architecture, and finally, the massive thermal module.
Let's start with pillar number 1, Zen 4 processing power, and the absolute freedom of having no battery limits. To really understand this processor, we first have to recognize a massive fundamental shift. The Steam Deck is a portable device, meaning it is severely constrained by a handheld battery. But the Steam Machine, it plugs straight into your wall. That means we get to upgrade from an older 4-core Zen 2 CPU up to a semi-custom AMD Zen 4 CPU. We're talking 6 cores, 12 threads, and clock speeds absolutely screaming up to 4.8 GHz. But why this actually matters for you as a player is the power ceiling. This processor operates at a 30-watt thermal design power, or TDP. That gives it considerably more headroom to calculate complex game physics, really dense AI routines, and massive open worlds without choking.
Moving right along to pillar number 2, the RDNA 3 graphics core. This is the big GPU leap.
Now, anyone who's ever built a PC knows a fast CPU is only half the battle. The injection of raw graphical horsepower here is staggering. We are jumping from just 8 compute units on the Steam Deck to a massive 28 compute units on the newer RDNA 3 architecture. We're essentially moving from a chip designed to push pixels to a tiny 7-inch handheld screen to a semi-custom GPU that aligns much closer to a current-generation PlayStation 5 or a modern desktop graphics card.
But what does all that geek speak actually translate to when you're just sitting on your couch with a controller? Basically, Valve's explicit target here is letting you play games at full 4K resolution at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second using AMD's Fidelity FX Super Resolution upscaling. Plus, this sheer volume of compute units finally brings native ray tracing support to the table, something the deck really struggles heavily with. And to fuel all of that, the GPU alone draws between 110 and 130 watts. Again, totally freed from the limits of handheld battery power.
All right, pillar number 3, dedicated memory architecture. Basically the fuel for that giant GPU.
Think of it like this. Having a massive engine doesn't mean much without the fuel lines to supply it. On the Steam Deck, memory is managed using a unified pool of 16 gigabytes. So in a really demanding game, the absolute maximum memory the system will ever hand over to the GPU is 4 gigabytes. The rest has to be saved for the system and the game's actual logic. In modern AAA titles with those massive high-resolution textures, 4 gigabytes simply isn't enough. The GPU literally starves for data, and that's exactly when you experience those frustrating frame stutters and texture pop-ins.
So, Valve totally flipped the script on the Steam Machine. They've split the memory architecture completely. You get 16 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM strictly for general system operations, plus an entirely separate 8 gigabytes of dedicated GDDR6 video RAM reserved exclusively for the graphics processor. Now sure, some hardcore enthusiasts argue they would have preferred 10 or 12 gigs of VRAM, but giving the GPU its own dedicated, high-speed pool of 8 gigabytes is exactly what provides the vital headroom needed to load those ultra-high-resolution textures and just eliminate those stuttering issues of the past.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, pillar number 4, the thermal module, or as I like to call it, cooling the GabeCube.
Seriously? How on earth do you cool a 30-watt CPU and a 130-watt GPU inside a tiny 5.9-inch cube? That was the core engineering dilemma for Valve here. The community has affectionately nicknamed this device the GabeCube because, well, it's a near-perfect 5.9-inch cube.
To give you a visual, imagine an Xbox Series X but chopped down to just a third of its height. Shoving over 150 watts of heat-generating silicon into a tiny, sealed box sitting in a stuffy TV entertainment center is usually a recipe for a total thermal meltdown.
Valve became totally obsessed with solving this heat problem, and it gave us one of my absolute favorite quotes from their engineering team. They said, "We have more CFD, that's computational fluid dynamics, hours on this thing than an F1 team." That is wild. They literally treated the airflow of this console like the aerodynamics of a race car.
Here's the secret sauce. It's all about how they allocated the space inside that cube. A staggering 70% of the internal volume of the Steam machine isn't even circuitry. It is dedicated entirely to a server-inspired copper heatsink and one massive single fan. Because they weren't forced to build a flat device to accommodate a screen and controller grips, they could dedicate an unprecedented amount of physical space to sustained cooling. That means those powerful chips we just talked about can run at their absolute maximum clock speeds indefinitely, completely silently, with zero thermal throttling.
Let's wrap things up with our summary. A new living room standard.
Okay, stepping back and bringing it all together now. This is the ultimate payoff of our teardown today, and it shows exactly where that 6x mathematical multiplier actually comes from. We're jumping from 4 to 6 CPU cores on a way faster architecture. We're jumping from 8 to 28 graphics compute units. We break completely free from shared memory to a dedicated 8GB VRAM pool. And we move from a thermally constrained handheld to a 5.9-inch desktop cube that is essentially just one giant, highly engineered heatsink.
But, and there's always a but, right? All of this incredible engineering comes at a very real cost. Due to massive global memory and component shortages driven by the AI sector, Valve announced the 512GB model will launch in June 2026 at a starting price of $1,049. It is an undeniable premium. So I leave you with this to consider. Knowing exactly what is happening under the hood now and seeing the absolute massive leap in targeted dedicated performance, is that 6x power leap enough to justify the price tag and conquer your living room? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today.